Welcome to our next discipleship class. So in this class, we're going to take a look at what's coming next, what's on the eschatological calendar for the Bible. And in order for us to understand the end times, or technically eschatology or the study of last things, we need to go through a few points. There's a lot of information out there. People are, a lot of times they do what we would call, newspaper prophecy and everything else. So we want to actually kind of settle down. Let's look at what the Bible teaches on this and then go forward. So we'll use the Bible as our basis. Certainly we can take, once we understand what the Bible says, and then see how the world applies, to which there's a lot that is going on for sure. But we want to make sure that we remain biblical in our perspectives and we don't branch off into kind of misinterpreting the Bible in order to make it fit certain criteria that we think is coming about to fulfill prophecy today. Sometimes people write a lot of books, they appear on a lot of talk shows and everything else, and they're talking about what the Bible is saying about different parts of the world, the U.S. and others, when in fact it's actually not saying that at all. And unfortunately, people get confused. So let's keep it with the Bible. We'll stay strict with that, and we'll move forward. So we need to start out with premillennialism. Why is it important? Again, I'll use Dr. Geisler's presentation as a foundation for this, and his information is there at the bottom of the screen if you want more from him, and I would recommend anything that he puts out. So we were taught to pray the disciples' prayer in Matthew 6, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." That has not yet happened. The kingdom is not here. We are not in the kingdom in the sense that it is going to come. So let's move into this and see what the Bible actually teaches us about the coming kingdom, premillennialism, or the millennial kingdom, the 1,000-year reign of Christ. So the outline we'll follow is what is premillennialism and why is it important? So what is it? If we want to define it, pre obviously means before. Millennium is 1,000 years, so it's before the 1,000 years. It's the doctrine that Christ will return to earth bodily and reign for 1,000 years. We see this in Revelation chapter 20. Now, it is distinguished from amillennialism. Amillennialism, the A in the front of it, means no. So there's no literal millennium. There's no literal 1,000-year reign of Christ. That's what amillennialists believe. They think that he only has a spiritual reign currently, but that's all that will ever occur. And then postmillennialism, post is after, obviously. Christ returns after the millennial reign, the 1,000 years, which is brought about by the church. So this was very popular at the end of the 1800s. Once we hit the 20th century, unfortunately, World War I and then World War II kind of put the kibosh on this a bit. But what happened is the church and the theologians realized, the ones that believed in this way, that the church is not going to Christianize the world, and then that will allow Jesus to return. That's not going to happen, and it's not biblical anyway, so we will move forward. So premillennialism is delineated in Scripture in Revelation 20, which is really the basis of where we discover the length, why we call it a millennial reign or 1,000-year reign. John says, "I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus. They came to life and reigned with Christ for," you get it, 1,000 years. "The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended." So This is at the end of the tribulation period. In chapter 19, Jesus returns, and then chapter 20, the 1,000-year reign begins. This is the first resurrection. John goes on, "Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years." And we'll come back to this verse later on. Now, this premillennial position, this 1,000-year reign, actually was declared by the early church fathers, Clement of Rome, Ignatius, in the Didache, which is a writing that was a teaching regarding some of the features that the early church wanted to get out to the churches. Irenaeus, Justin Martyr, and Commodinius. So these are just some of the early church fathers. The medieval fathers, early St. Augustine, he changed his position. And then early English authors would be John Gill and Spurgeon. Though they were Calvinists, they held to the millennial reign of Christ. Early American would be Jonathan Edwards, also from the same theological persuasion. Now, the reason that that's important is because they believed in a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ, and Calvinists in the Reformed aspect of the church typically believe, not all the time, but typically will take on the position that the Reformers had from the 1500s, and their position was amillennial. They did not believe in a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ, and they did not literally believe in that believe in that literal 1,000 years because the Roman Catholic Church didn't. They dealt with the subject of salvation by faith, and they looked at the scriptures and analyzed them and came to the conclusion that salvation by faith obviously was what the scriptures literally taught in its normal reading and understanding. The people could not buy their way to heaven, buy their way out of purgatory with indulgences, which the Catholic Church was teaching, nor could they earn their way by works. So the Reformers did a great job in that. However, when they went forward, they did not take the same hermeneutical principles. In other words, they didn't use the same consistent principles to interpret prophecy, and so basically came away with the same view as the Roman Catholics in eschatology, which is amillennial. The 19th century American George Peters, and then in the 20th century, you can see the list there. They all believed in a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ. So it's described in the Bible. In Revelation 19, John saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. He is called the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white, pure, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. This is really in reference to the rock that was cut without hands in Daniel chapter 2 in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And he will rule them with a rod of iron. And that will be required because the people that are moved into the 1,000-year reign from the tribulation period, those saved believers, will reproduce. They will not receive their glorified bodies at that time. Only the Old Testament saints will be resurrected for their involvement in the kingdom at that point. But the people that are alive do not get changed into their eternal bodies. They need to reproduce. There will be the multiplication of people during that 1,000-year reign, and they have to make a decision for Christ. And so, though Satan will be he will be bound during that time until the end, a short time at the end. People will have a sin nature, and so they will be acting on that sin nature, or they will try to, which requires the ruler of the world, the Lord Jesus Christ, to rule with a rod of iron. In other words, things will not be tolerated as they are today. They will not be allowed to have the freedom to do the evil that we see today. Currently, it seems like things are out of control. They're not. God is allowing these things to run their course. He is allowing a measure of freedom that will not be allowed during that time, because he does not govern the world from Jerusalem as he will then. The nations of the world govern, and the nations of the world are not capable of suppressing all the evil. As a matter of fact, many times they are the sources of the evil. But anyways, he says, and on his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Kings are kings because they have somebody to reign over. And that is the beginning of the millennial kingdom introduced in Revelation 19. The length we see is mentioned 6 times when we get into the first verses in chapter 20. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for, number 1, 1,000 years, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until, number 2, the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. They came to life and reigned with Christ for, yes, number 3, 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until, you got it, number 4, 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection, and they will reign with him for, yes, 1,000 years. And when number 6 mentioned, the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison. It goes on to talk about he'll have that opportunity to deceive the nations once again. And the people that were born during those 1,000 years will have the opportunity to make a decision for Christ, or whether they want to rebel with Satan. As silly as that sounds, but God gives everybody the free choice in that. And that is where we get the concept in the Bible of libertarian free will. We are not determined to believe or not believe. God has not set that ahead of time. He knows it ahead of time, but remember, God's foreknowledge, foreknowing is not foreacting, and knowing what's going to happen is not determining what's going to happen. Those are two different things. So the government of the millennium, what is that going to be like? Isaiah 9:6. Now, what's interesting is we understand the characteristics of the millennial reign, not from Revelation chapter 20. Now, what's interesting is people that try to oppose the literal 1,000 years say, well, you know, you're getting all that out of Revelation 20. On the contrary, the only thing we get from Revelation 20 is what we just read, for the most part, the length of it, as well as the fact that Satan will be bound and then released during that time, and the resurrections that will happen then. So here we get the characteristics, really, of the millennium, and this being the first thing we'll look at as the government of the millennium, from the Old Testament prophets. This is all out of the Old Testament. This was something that is focused at and through the nation of Israel, which is why replacement theology is so dangerous, and it is entirely unbiblical. But anyways, for unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. So we see that this provides not only information regarding the characteristics, but the type of government that is going to happen and who is going to be the ruler in that government. Satan will be bound during that time, as we read. And here it is once again, where it says, I saw the angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years and threw him into the pit so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. So he'll have that opportunity to do that at the end, like we said. How about the people that will populate the kingdom? Jesus says when the Son of Man comes, and this is in Matthew 24 and 25, he's talking about the tribulation period, moving into the millennial reign at his return. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say unto those on his right, Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So there's going to be a separation of the sheep and goats at the end. And then the sheep are the ones, the believers that come out of the tribulation will be allowed to enter the 1,000-year reign, the kingdom, to begin that. This is why I think that the post-tribulation position is really, it becomes a moot issue if you believe in the fact that the church is going through the tribulation, though if that were the case, most of the church wouldn't survive anyways because most believers will not. But the separation is made here at this judgment time with the nations. This is unnecessary if the righteous from the unrighteous are separated in the rapture at the end. This would be a meaningless exercise. So, the rewards during the millennial kingdom. Luke tells us in chapter 19, when he returned after receiving the kingdom, he ordered that these slaves, and this is in parabolic form that Jesus was telling, he ordered that these slaves to whom he had given money be called to him so that he might know what business they had done. The first appeared, saying, Master, your mina has made 10 minas more. And he said to him, Well done, good slave, because you have been faithful in a very little thing, you are to be in authority over 10 cities. The second came, saying, Your mina, master, made 5 minas. And he said to him, Also, and you are to be over 5 cities. Another came, saying, Master, here is your mina which I kept put away in a handkerchief. For I was afraid of you, because you are an exacting man. He said to him, By your own words I will judge you, you worthless slave. So it is how we serve Jesus Christ in this life, what we do in our service to him, and what he's called each individual to do, that will determine our reward then, during the millennial reign, and then in our eternal reward. So if you are not responsible in this life, then don't look for anything in the millennial reign, in the kingdom time, because when Jesus returns, he's going to take what people were willingly responsible for and did in this life for him, and then reward them equally in the responsibility that they get in the kingdom time. So this is a parable that illustrates that, and this is how rewards work. This is not, the kingdom of God is not socialistically run. Rewards, though salvation is equal to everybody that receives it, it's the free grace of God, it's undeserved. Rewards do not function like that. Rewards are deserved because God functions in his government off of a merit system when it comes to rewards and responsibility. God is big on responsibility, and so we all have to be responsible for our own part. The lifespan during the millennium, this is interesting. Isaiah tells us, No more shall there be an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not fill out his days. For the young man shall die 100 years old, and the sinner 100 years old shall be accursed. So they're going to look at somebody that dies at 100 and say, wow, he really must have done something wrong, or there must be a problem here, because 100 years old is just too short. It's young. So the lifespans are going to be expanded during that time. Again, Old Testament prophet providing that characteristic. The world conditions. Again, Isaiah tells us, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor and decide the equity for the meek of the earth, and he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. Again, people are not going to be able to get away with what they get away with now, because there'll be new management, as they say. Now, this is outside of the UN, and so they put this scripture verse with it from Micah chapter 4, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And somehow the United Nations, given this present here, this image was done because supposedly the United Nations is going to fulfill this scripture verse. That couldn't be further from the truth. There's been more war since the UN has come into power than probably there was actually before that. And the UN has no capability of fulfilling this scripture verse. They will be put down just like every other government of the world when Jesus Christ returns. So that's not going to happen, especially through them. Only Jesus can do that. Now, Israel during the millennial reign, they will certainly have a priority. It says, in that day the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands of the sea. So Israel will be regathered to enter into the kingdom. We see that again in Matthew 24, where the angels are sent to the four corners of the earth to gather together God's elect. That's not the church. That is not anything to do with the church. That is dealing with Israel, those elect. Paul adds in Romans 11, Romans 9 is Israel's election as a nation to serve God. Romans 10 is their rejection because they did not receive the Messiah by faith, and Romans 11 is their restoration. And that's what Paul is dealing with here in context. Paul added, for if you were cut off, talking about the Gentiles, from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted, contrary to nature, into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, talking about the Jews, the natural branches, be grafted back into their own olive tree? A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. In this way, all Israel will be saved. There'll be a time when God gathers them, and then the nation will be restored, which is the only way that Jesus Christ will return. He said at the end of Matthew 23, your house is left to you desolate. You will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, until they want him to return. But that will be because through the tribulation period, Israel will be turned back to God. Matthew 19, Jesus said to them, I tell you the truth, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So that means Israel has to be there to be judged. And then this is obviously a promise to the apostles. Isaiah 2, it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established. Mountain is typically of government. It's a metaphor for government in this context, as the highest of the mountains over all governments, right? And shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it, and many people shall come and say, come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways. So this is, again, during the time when Jesus is reigning. Isaac Watts said in 1719, Jesus shall reign where'er the sun does its successive journeys run. His kingdom spread from shore to shore, to moons shall wax and wane no more. To him shall endless prayer be made, and endless praises crown his head. His name like sweet perfume shall rise with every morning sacrifice. So that's kind of the classic there. How about animals during the millennial reign? The wolf, Isaiah tells us, shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child will lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze. Usually the bear is grazing on the cow. Their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like an ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra. So that was obviously not a safe thing to do today. And the weaned child should put his hand into the adder's den, the poisonous snake. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. So there will be no danger from the animals during that time. And so this will be a restoration back to what it was like prior to sin entering into the world. When man sinned, it affected all of creation, and like Paul says in Romans 8, that all of creation groans. It is not just human beings. It extends to the animal kingdom and the ground. The ground is cursed because of sin. Children during that time. It says, unlike heaven, where resurrected persons have no children because, quote, neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels of heaven, Matthew 22, the people who enter the millennium alive will have innumerable children, like Isaiah says, for by the end of the millennium, the Bible speaks of, quote, the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, and that, quote, their number is like the sand of the sea. So there'll be a great multiplication during that time, which is why they have to make a decision for Christ, and they will have the option to decide against him at the end when Satan is released. The end of the millennium, judgment will be on the evil one and the evil ones. So, the end of the millennium, the evil one, and when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison, will come up to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea, and they marched up over the broad plain of the earth and sounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. So Satan will be released from prison to deceive the nations. But fire came down from heaven, and it consumed them, and the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So the evil one will be cast into the lake of fire, along with those that are in hell or Hades right now, will be brought up to the white throne judgment. Jesus Christ will judge them. John chapter 5 tells us that he judges them because he is the Son of Man. That's a reference to Daniel chapter 7. He is God in human flesh, and because of that, he has the right to judge them. He walked in our shoes. He lived in this life. He was sinless and perfect, and he will be the one to determine people's eternity because of their rejection of him. The books will be opened, and in those books, all the deeds that people did that they would not allow him to pay for, all their wickedness, they will have to pay for themselves. So they don't want to believe in Jesus, and they did not want to enter into a relationship with him and submit their lives to him, so they can do what they want to do, but everything has a consequence to it. And here's the great white throne. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. From his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, stand before the throne, and the books were opened, and the dead were judged by what was in the books. Then death and hell were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, that is the lake of fire. Now, it is really unfortunate that people don't understand that God loves them, that Jesus paid the price for their sin, that he has redeemed them. The redemption was accomplished. All people have to do is receive the work of Christ done on their behalf. He paid that sin debt for the world. But if people don't want him to pay it, then they have to pay it themselves. It does not have to be that way, but everybody has to make their choice of him. The lake of fire, it goes on, if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So notice we ended at verse 14 and went into verse 15 here. So the book, there's the book of life with everybody's name in it. And then as people reject Christ, their name is blotted out. The Lamb's book of life is those who have been redeemed by the Lamb. And then if their names are not in that book, then they've been blotted out and they will enter into the lake of fire. Then there's a new heaven. We see that, the New Jerusalem in Revelation 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. God will wipe away all tears from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither pain any more, for the former things have passed away. So the New Jerusalem is supposed to be 1,500 mile cube, right? If you lay that over the U.S., it would take up a good part of the United States, the majority. So very large city indeed, and it's three-dimensional. So what is the millennium? What is this millennial reign? Number one, it is paradise regained. Number two, it is the animal creation restored. These are the things that occur there. I'm just going to pause the video for one moment because I want to make this slide a little clearer. All right, so that should be a little better. We'll walk through this slide. The words are a little fuzzy. So what is the millennium, right? Ultimately, it is paradise regained. We lost paradise in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve's sin. It is the animal creation restored to the place that it was at in the original creation prior to sin. It is the nation of Israel re-engrafted. We saw the quote from Romans 11. Israel is regrafted into the natural root, and so they are, though they are right now temporarily cut off because of their unbelief, they will be regrafted in as a nation, because obviously individual Jews get saved now as in any time. It is the climax of human history. Human history has to have an end point to it. It doesn't just hit a wall. There has to be, it has to come to this, it builds to this climax at the end, and that's what we have in the millennium. It's the literal reign of Christ on earth. He is going to reign. Adam and Eve reigned. They lost their reign, and it will be regained on earth in the same sphere that it was lost. It is the time of perfect peace and justice, because the Prince of Peace will be reigning. That's the only time that that's actually going to occur. It is what the human heart yearns for. This is interesting. Everybody wants this. Everybody has a sense that this is where we need to go, but yet it's how they view it and what they think it will get us there is where we differentiate, right? And it is that for which we pray for when we say, again, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And right now, God's will is only done in heaven. It's done on earth by his people, but it is not done on earth by everybody, and it will be then. So why is it important? Without a millennium, God lost the war. So um, under this category. Number one, God created a literal paradise on earth in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. We see that. And then this paradise was lost by sin. We talked about that. So the devil won that battle and stole it away from man. Man was no longer exercising the dominion over the earth that God, or the rulership that God had provided. Sin entered into the world, Romans 5. Death entered into the world through that sin, not just into human beings, but all creation. A curse was pronounced upon the world. We know that, right? The ground was cursed, and then everything is affected, everything. But God is omnipotent and can't lose a war. He has all power. God is not going, this isn't some battle that we're watching and we're biting our fingernails wondering what's going to happen at the end. We already have the answer. So there must be a literal paradise regained that will, first of all, reverse sin by salvation, which we see that Jesus has done, but it will be completed in the millennium. Reverse death by resurrection, reverse the curse by restoration. Paradise will be restored by the millennial reign of Christ. So under E, number 2, without a millennium, history has no climax. So here is a picture. You can stop the video here. This is actually a representative of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. We have the head of gold, chest and arms of silver, the stomach and thighs of brass, and legs that are iron mixed with the toes and clay. So notice in the picture, there's a stone cut without hands. Well, that is not of human creation in the sense that is uniquely Christ, and then he destroys those world-governing empires, and the empires that will be reigning through those 10 toes, the 10-division ruling government that the Antichrist oversees in the end times. And so Jesus puts down the Antichrist government and all its aspects and then establishes his own. But this is a layout of the times of the Gentiles that started with Nebuchadnezzar and then ends with the millennial reign, as you can see in the picture. I think it's an excellent representation. Without a millennium, history has no climax. A, history is moving forward towards an end, which we just saw in the picture. That's Daniel 2, and then Daniel 7 is the pieces underneath it in parallel. They both speak. Daniel 2 is Nebuchadnezzar's viewpoint of it, and then Daniel 7 is what God gave to Daniel. But without a literal millennium, there is no real end of history. Nothing is concluded. All the problems that arose are not, they're not resolved. They just, it's like, God just ended things and that's the way it is, and so they don't mean anything. Well, of course they have to be resolved. He's God. He's righteous. It's his universe. He's not going to sweep things under the carpet and just kind of let them go by. They need to be dealt with, every single one of them. For amillennialists, history just stops and eternity begins. Well, what about all the problems? Why even introduce them, and why develop towards an end and then have no end? It just doesn't make any sense, which is why the Bible teaches differently. For premillennials, premills, to shorten it, history comes to a climax. In other words, everything ends in the climax of the millennial reign of Christ, and the issues that are problems are resolved. Everything is restored. The millennium is not the first chapter of eternity, it's the last chapter of time. And that's an important distinction. When, by Christ's reign, sin, suffering, and death will be finally overcome. Again, we don't just hit a wall and they go away. They have to be resolved. For only, quote, then the end will come when he, Christ, hands over the kingdom to God the Father after he has destroyed all dominion, authority, and power. which is 1 Corinthians 15, that Paul says there, but Christ alone does this through his millennial reign. There's no other way to do that. That's why amillennialists try to squeeze it all happening now. Satan's bound now. Satan has no capability. And right now they view, because they don't believe in a future millennial reign, they have to allegorize the book of Revelation and kind of squeeze it into current time. And it just doesn't work. Allegorization of Scripture, which eventually we'll get to in this short series that we're going through, demonstrates that. Allegorization is a very poor and inaccurate way to view the Scriptures. Denying a millennium undermines other essential doctrines. A, it is based on a consistent literal interpretation. In other words, the millennial reign is based on consistency. As we interpret the Bible literally or normally, then the millennial reign is the normal result of seeing the Bible that way. As we quoted, some of the characteristics of the kingdom and obviously the length of the kingdom. It takes all the Bible literally, including prophecy. In other words, it doesn't change when we get to prophecy. It takes both first and second advents literally. Jesus' first and second coming. Why would you change one, right? Denying the literal interpretation leads to heresy. Number one, if Genesis is not taken literally, it undermines A, human depravity, right? You have no basis for sin in the world. B, creation and marriage. I mean, that's where we get that, right? Jesus obviously believed it, Matthew 19. If the Gospels aren't taken literally, it undermines, number one, the virgin birth, right? Because it just becomes a story. The deity of Christ, the atoning death of Christ, right? Jesus' bodily resurrection, the second coming of Christ, and the resurrection of believers. All these things go away if we don't take the Gospels literally, because that's what's discussed in the Gospels and that's what's presented. It is vital that we have a consistent interpretation of the Bible, whether it's in one doctrinal area or another. We don't allegorize when we jump into prophecy or something else. It needs to be consistent. And but we'll talk about that a little more later when we deal with interpretation. So it rests on an interpretation fundamental. Number one, doctrinal fundamentals. In other words, the Trinity, the deity of Christ, his atonement, his resurrection. These are a test of heresy. In other words, to deny these is heretical, and it's like, this is where the cults come in, right? So this is where we get to the place that when we say something is heresy, it's not only unorthodox, it's directly contrary to what the Bible is teaching, which is why to deny any of these doctrines, and we went over this in the Essentials class, a person can't be saved. Obviously, people may not understand fully everything, but they cannot deny it, and that's what the cults do. They're doctrinal fundamentals. Knowledge fundamentals, the inspiration and inerrancy of Scripture, these are a test of consistency. So, in a sense, if you look at it, the first 11 doctrines in the Essentials are a test for heresy, and then, or actually the first 14, and then inspiration is a test of consistency. In other words, if the Bible is not inerrant, then you can't get the other doctrines. You can't get the first 14 doctrines out if number 15, which is the inspiration and inerrancy of Scripture, in other words, the only way to be consistent with an inerrant word is to have those doctrines. In other words, though they are, though you're interpreting the first 11 doctrines teachings to establish your doctrinal position, if you don't believe that the Bible is inspired by God and inerrant, then it doesn't really matter what they say because they could be wrong. So this is where inerrancy comes in. And then finally, the interpretation fundamental, literal interpretation in premillennialism that results from it is also a test of consistency. In other words, if you are interpreting all the doctrines literally, when you come to prophecy, you can't just say, well, I think I'll be allegorizing that aspect. That's not how it works. That is inconsistent. It's very poor Bible study methods. So without a millennium, God would break an unconditional land promise to Abraham. In other words, God would not be true to his word. The extent of the land gift to Abraham would be broken. The Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. Well, that's not where they're controlling right now. They don't have that land. That has to be fulfilled. So either that's fulfilled, or then God is lying, or the scriptures are not true. In other words, you have to go to those kind of implications, which we obviously have no evidence for. We have evidence for the fact that scriptures are inerrant, and what God says is true. He's always true to his word. He can't lie. Genesis 17, God said to Abraham, I will give you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession. Well, they don't even have that now, so that has to happen. And that's where you see that they are given. Now notice, as you look at it, the arrow on the left, you see the little strip of Israel there, and yet you go all the way over to the Euphrates where the border of Iraq is, and they don't have, they are not in control of that land. They don't have it. It's not theirs, but they will. That is God's promise to Abraham. The duration of the land promise. For all the land which you see, I give you and your descendants forever, not just for a short time and then lose it. God said to Abraham, I give you the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession. Note, forever can mean a very long time. Revelation 20 says it will be 1,000 years, which is a very long time. So the bottom line is that they are going to have the land. They have not had it yet. Revelation 20 fulfills that promise. The unconditional nature of the land promised to Abraham. Abraham did not need to do something to fulfill that. It was a unilateral promise. It was unconditional. God made the promise from his side. Abraham was sleeping, if you want to read about that, in Genesis 15. Now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and it came to pass when the sun went down, and it was dark, and behold, there was a smoking oven and burning torch that passed between those pieces. That was the Lord. On the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants, I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. So the point being here is that Abraham did not need to fulfill some condition in order for God to accomplish that. God promised to do that, and it was unconditional. Abraham had cut the animal in half. Those are some of the verses that are not in there. And then when he had shooed away the birds. Well, what they did in those days, they didn't sign a covenant like we do today, like when you buy something and you have a contract. They cut an animal in half, and then both parties would walk between the animal, basically agreeing to the fact that, hey, if I don't fulfill my end of the bargain, then, you can divide me in two here. So you're banking your life on it, your character, everything you are. But Abraham fell asleep, and so God went through alone. It is a unilateral, one-sided, unconditional covenant. The unconditional nature of God's promise. Paul, again, connecting all this, he says the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. God does not change on his gifts and calling, and in this context, he's dealing with the nation of Israel. He has not gone back on what he promised Israel. God's promises don't depend on our faith, but on God's faithfulness. That's what a promise is. If we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. He'd have to deny his own character. He would make himself into a liar, which obviously that is not the case. Number 3, God's promise was immutable. Hebrews 6:13, when he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself to show the immutability of his counsel, that by 2 immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie. He can't lie. He would cease to be God, and that's not going to happen either. So these things are sure. There's no question. Number 5, without a millennium, God would break an unconditional throne promise to David. So in 2 Samuel, he told David, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, right, his descendant, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. My steadfast love will not depart from him. This is talking about the Lord Jesus Christ. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. This is the millennial kingdom. In Psalm 89, my steadfast love I will keep for him forever, and my covenant will stand firm for him. I will establish his offspring forever, and his throne as the days of the heavens. If his children forsake my law, then I will punish their transgression with the rod, and their iniquity with stripes. But I will not remove him from my steadfast love, or be false to my faithfulness. Now, it's not saying that Jesus is going to have children. It's talking about we are children of God. I will not violate my covenant or alter the word that went forth from my lips. Once for all I have sworn by my holiness, I will not lie to David. His offspring shall endure forever. His throne as long as the sun before me, like the moon, it shall be established forever. So this again is the promise to David and David's offspring, ultimately the Messiah. Without a millennium, man's deepest longings for a utopia will go unfulfilled. Now, this is interesting because in Judaism, they expect the Messiah. Well, he came, but they obviously didn't recognize Jesus of Nazareth as him. The Shiite Muslims seek the return of the Mahdi. He's the 12th Imam to establish peace and justice. You get into that and you realize how interesting that actually is, because when you actually start describing how he's going to rule the world, it really defines the Antichrist, not the Christ. So Buddhists, they anticipate the reincarnation of the Buddha or ascended master. In other words, they're all looking for utopia. Everybody has this idea it's all going to work out. Something's going to solve all the problems, which everybody understands are there. Marxists work for a social communist utopia. Oh, God help us. Self-interest capitalists work for a largely government-free capitalist society, right, so that they can just prosper. Behavioral humanists look for a Walden 2. Those of you who are old enough to remember that will know what that's all about. And then scientific humanists attempt to make a technological utopia without disease or death. So that's why you see a lot of the experimentation today. They want to do, genetic manipulation and DNA alterations and everything so that they can prevent disease and have perfect people. It's a mistake, and it's going to rework what Hitler failed in the first time, and seeking to try to humanly develop the perfect society, and it'll come back and just hurt a lot of people. Without a millennium, we lack an urgency in evangelism. An imminent, that means at any moment in time, premillennialism prompts a certain sense of urgency not generated by the other views. If Christ is coming at a time when we do not know, then we should have a consistent sense of urgency. And the pre-tribulational rapture with premillennialism, that is that we need to do the work, get the gospel out, because Jesus can return at any time, and we are accountable to live according to that urgency also, in line with the gospel. Jesus said, "Occupy till I come," Luke 19, "and the night is coming when no one can work," John 9, "the Lord is at hand," Philippians 4. So you see the connection of this theme throughout the Gospels and the epistles. And then you see it lived in the book of Acts. If one believes his time is limited and Christ may come at any moment, then he will have more of a sense of urgency about evangelism. This is a far greater sense of urgency than death, for it could be our last opportunity to reach anyone at any moment. And that's what we have with the view of premillennialism and pre-tribulationism on top of that. It is no coincidence that most of the modern missionary movements, with William Carey, David Livingstone, Adrian Judson, and evangelistic efforts of Wesley, Sunday, D.L. Moody, Billy Graham, they were all premillennialists. In other words, they all understood that Jesus was going to come. He could come at any time, especially for the church, that he could come at any moment to rapture us out. Without a millennium, we lack an incentive for holiness. Imminence, that Jesus could return at any time, is an added incentive for holiness. John declared, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Everyone who has this hope in him purifies himself just as he is pure. That's 1 John chapter 3. Peter said the day of the Lord will come as a thief. You don't know when that's going to happen. In other words, the tribulation is going to start. There's no warnings of it. We have the warnings now. But there's no warning that, okay, it's going to start, in a couple of weeks or whatever. The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire. Since everything will be destroyed in this way, what kind of people ought you to be? You ought to live holy and godly lives. So the imminent coming of Christ for the church that starts us into this day, the tribulation period, and ends in the millennial reign, can occur at any moment, and everything is going to get destroyed by the end, really, of the 1,000-year reign, and then you have a new heavens and a new earth. So in summary, without a millennium, God lost the war to Satan. Without a millennium, history has no climax. Denying a millennium undermines essential doctrines. Without a millennium, God would break an unconditional land promise to Abraham. Without a millennium, God would break an unconditional throne promise to David. Without a millennium, man's God-given longings for a utopia will go unfulfilled. Without a millennial, we lack an urgency in evangelism. So without a millennium, finally, we lack an incentive for. And first, things will get worse. Now, things are going to get worse before they get better, obviously. Jesus said this is regarding the tribulation period, right? This not only talks about leading up to the tribulation period, but quotes from further on in Matthew 24 and discusses the actual tribulation period. You'll hear of wars and rumors of wars, but the end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pangs, when they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. So the outlook is dark, but the uplook is bright. So things are going to get worse before they get better. But why Christ must come before the millennium? In other words, why does he come before? Obviously, to establish it. He must come back literally before he can reign literally. He can't reign 1,000 years unless he comes before the 1,000 years. The logic of that shouldn't escape anybody. David's literal throne can't be restored unless the son of David comes to reign on it. Israel's kingdom can't be restored to Israel until Israel's king comes to restore it. And there will be no lasting peace until the Prince of Peace comes. This is as clear and simple as we can make it. Why is it so important? Because denying it, number one, is an attack on the character of God. You're saying that God's not going to fulfill what he promised. It undermines the promises of God. It destroys the completion of the plan of God. All these things are affected. It undermines essential doctrines of the Word of God, and it eliminates a guard protecting essential doctrines of the Church of God and it diminishes the motive for witnessing for God and minimizes the motive of holy living for God. All these things get affected if you wipe out the millennial reign as being a literal millennium. So this is how it's described in the Bible. Again, you can freeze this and look at it. You have the beginning in Revelation 19. That's the text, and then the condition is Christ coming. The length, right, gives you the verse, and then the 1,000 years, the government. These are the things that we walk through. And then, again, freezing or stopping the video at this point, you can look at that, make a copy of it, do what you want. But that is the millennium and how it's described in the Bible in its characteristics. And then after the millennium, this is interesting because this is the differences as you look at the millennium, which is the 1,000-year reign. Then you get the new heaven and the new earth. And so you notice, there's an end. The 1,000-year reign is 1,000 years, the new heaven, new earth. That's eternity. There is no end, right? Evil is still present during the millennial reign. You have to have Jesus rules with a rod of iron, but then it's gone forever. Death is still present. It has to be put down, right, from 1 Corinthians 15, and then Jesus delivers the kingdom up to his Father after death is taken care of, and then it's gone forever, right? The location, judgment, right? So again, you can stop this and look at it. The last one there, Satan, he's tied up for a time and he's judged forever. So there's a very clear distinction between the 1,000-year reign, the millennial reign of Christ, where he brings everything to a climax and concludes it and resolves the issues that were opened up earlier in human history that the Bible tells us about, and then how it is solved there, so that then we can go on into the new heavens and the new earth where righteousness will dwell, where all the problems of the past are gone. And then it's, evil is quarantined in the lake of fire, and then we live on for eternity with the Lord. So interesting stuff. If you want to get detail about this, you can purchase this Seminary in a Box by Dr. Norman Geisler. It's a bunch of videos and many of the presentations that I give here. A lot of them come out of the Seminary in a Box, which I have permission from his ministry to use. So I can't tell you how valuable this is. It really is like a seminary in a box. If you're never going to make it to seminary, if you're never going to get there, buy this, go through the information. You'll never regret it. So with that, may God richly bless you as you continue to study his word.